back. This week we talk about Parashat Vayechi, Jacob's blessing. This parasha is the 12th and final portion in the book of Genesis. And the name Vayechi is a Hebrew word that means, and he lived. And it is derived from the opening verse of the portion. The parasha, this one, primarily focuses on the final years of the patriarch Jacob's life and his blessings to his 12 sons. It also contains the account of Jacob's death and Joseph's final interaction with his brothers. And some of the key events we'll talk about here: Jacob's blessing, the death of Jacob, Joseph's reassurance, and then finally Joseph's death. So let's start it with Jacob's blessings. Before his death, Jacob gathers his sons around him to bestow blessings upon each one of them. And these blessings are prophetic in nature, foretelling the destiny and characteristics of each tribe that will descend from the respective sons. Sam, like for you to open up here.
Yeah, so I think the centerpiece here is really the blessings of Jacob towards his sons. That's kind of the centerpiece of the whole parasha, and this is kind of a very difficult area because there's 12 tribes. We're not exactly sure what became of these tribes throughout history, so we don't know if, or at least I don't know, if these prophecies were, how they were fulfilled and things like that. But there are some very interesting things here. The first thing is that Reuven, his firstborn, was basically knocked off of his pedestal of authority due to I guess you could say a sexual crime that he committed, which was he actually slept with one of his, I guess you could say, would they be like stepmothers, something like that? Actually, that was Jacob. Apparently, Jacob knew about it, but apparently he remained silent, and it doesn't show anywhere in the Torah that he did anything or said anything about it until now. And at this point, he brings it up and he says, "You're no longer the firstborn. You are unstable as water." And of course, we saw that that was the case. We saw a couple of examples in the parashas before this one that Reuven was unstable, right? Obviously, there was the act with his mother-in-law to begin with, but also when he went up to Jacob when they were trying to get him to release Benjamin to go with him back to Egypt. Reuven said something ridiculous, which is that, if I don't bring him back to you, you can kill my two sons. And Jacob just kind of shrugged it off and he said, kind of like, "You're crazy. I'm not letting my son go with you." And so we saw that there was something there with his with the mental instability. And then you have Shimon and Levi coming next, which is also really interesting because he lumps the two together. And we know, of course, later on that Levi really separated himself from Shimon. Shimon kind of eventually became extinct as a tribe. And then Levi, of course, became the priest. So they kind of went completely opposite ways. And but here he did not speak kindly about either one of them. And so the first three sons were negative. And it was only when you got to the fourth, which is Yehuda, that he emerges as the true leader. And of course, he spends, if you notice, lots of verses on his blessing. Most of the brothers had a couple of sentences, except for Yehuda and Yosef. They had kind of larger blessings. So that's the first thing that I noticed here. It was a very interesting.
Well, before that, let me interrupt you here. Doesn't Jacob bless Joseph's two sons prior to his own 12? When Joseph finds out he's getting sick, his father's sick, he immediately takes Ephraim and Menashe there to be blessed. And one of the things I find interesting is Jacob crosses his hands over to, it's tradition, it's common to bless the eldest first with the biggest blessings, but this time he switches it, and we see a continuation, for the last three parashat, that the not the firstborn is getting the firstborn's blessing, it's being switched. And here it is now, a third generation that this is happening to. Jacob with Esau, Joseph with his, and now we see Joseph's sons crossing. And I find it interesting and yet bothersome at the same time. And maybe that's because I'm a firstborn too, but I don't want to get gypped of my blessings. So what do you think about the hand switching?
Yeah, I think
it was.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
It was an innovation of the Torah, because in ancient civilization contemporary to Israel, the firstborn was always the one endowed with. He was practically the priest of the family, and he was always the leader. To him went the share of the lion. He will always get double portion. It is another innovation of the Torah to break with this tradition. The primogeniture is no longer automatically become the leader. It is amply demonstrated, as you have said. You will see it also with King David. He is not the firstborn, he is the seventh or the eighth born. So it is breaking with the past. It is an innovation of the Torah. It is the merit. God judges a man by his merit, not by the order of his birth automatically.
Right.
Very nice.
I don't think Shlomo was the firstborn of David either.
He was
Correct. Correct.
Right. And I was going to say that this is the introduction of a meritocracy, of that concept. And of course, we see that in the real world, it works very well. If you look at the American economy and the whole innovation that the United States has really brought to the world, it's really this. It's really the meritocracy, the fact that it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you come from or what your name is or who your parents were. If you can come over here and do something amazing, well, then that's it. That's all that it takes to make it in the United States. And this is why this was the American dream, right? That those shackles were broken. And so this is one of the ways in how the United States is more like the Torah than any other country, at least that I can think of on earth.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, look at the importance of this blessing, specifically with Menashe and Ephraim. What's happened? We do it to this day. We bless our children at Shabbat with Ephraim ve Menashe, and this has become now a tradition with us to bless our children with this. So it's a remarkable piece of this parasha.
Yeah. So it starts.
Sorry, go ahead.
Parsha starts with something that has become tradition, and then ends with something that is very much not traditional. Joseph is embalmed. That's not how we bury our dad.
Yeah, and Jacob.
Not
too.
today, but the Egyptian way was to embalm.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't
When they
forget.
were in Egypt.
Correct.
I think it was more that they wanted to transfer. I think it was more that they wanted to preserve the body so that they could transfer it to Eretz Israel.
Right, they did it to Jacob as well,
They did.
which I found was interesting. He's the only one of the patriarchs who was embalmed.
Correct.
But before we get on this, I actually had a question going back to our prior point with Ephraim and Menashe. The tradition of blessing the children on Shabbat, where does this come from? Is this something that was done in Morocco? Or is this, it was, okay, interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. So,
Yes.
so this
Absolutely.
it comes from way back when then.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Look at another question. I noticed if you look at the verse that I have highlighted, Joseph then removed them from his knees and bowed low with his face to the ground. When he removed Menashe and Ephraim from his knees, I'm assuming these were young kids or, above baby age, toddlers or in that age. Is that right? Or do we know differently from that?
I think they
Well,
were,
we know they must have been 17 to 19 years old because they were born shortly after Joseph became the vizier. So he's 30 to 32 years old when they were born. Now we are talking about him. He is 40. He's 30 now. No, how old is he now? 17 years have elapsed since Jacob came.
right. And then a
So
few
they
more
must be
years with
17 to
family.
19. And it is something that when you come, for instance, from Morocco, this is how we did. We stood at the knee. We didn't sit on their knee. We sat before them, literally.
Okay.
Or
So
we sat on their feet with our head close to their knee. So they are young adults. It is just a figure. It is a protocol.
So they sat on the floor or on like a low
Either
chair?
on the floor with their head reaching the knee. This is how we did when we visited our grandparents. We were many of us, so we sat either on the floor with our heads close to their knee, or we stood in front of our fathers at his knees.
Yeah, that's some of the most amazing traditions, I think, of the Sephardic Jewish world that I saw was just those overt signs of respect for the parents and grandparents. Some of the most beautiful things.
well, Sam, you also see that with another thing that I've, grown up in a Moroccan household. You also see that with the swearing. Do you see how he swears to his father? He puts his hand under his knee.
And that we kept in Morocco. We still swore this way.
Really?
Whenever we took an oath, we did it. Even we children, when my grandmother was upset with us, who broke this or who ate that, come here, put your hand under my thigh or over my thigh, very close to the belly. And this is how we swore. We kept that.
Absalom, can you speak to that as well?
Yeah, that's still today. The old people, they use that because they are lying and they ask for it's like a promising, giving. This is a very promise. Yeah, I will die. My mother told me also, please bring me to my city. I will not die in Tetuan.
Wow.
And so we did that. We keep this. And because you ask also because of the first one or second, the blessing is not with the first or second.
It is or it's not?
So we can see it like Ismail and Ishaq, Esau and others. Yeah. And here the hands over the youngest one to bless him, Ephraim. That's normal, but for the normal for Yosef was the first one should be blessed.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, "I know." He's not making a mistake.
Well,
He's
here
not
it
doing
is.
something wrong.
Here it is in the third Aliyah. When Joseph saw that his father was placing his right hand on Ephraim's head where it should have been on Menashe, he thought it wrong. So he took hold of his father's hand. Remember, Jacob doesn't see that well. His eyes were dim, as it's described. He holds his father's hand, moves it from Ephraim's head to Menashe's head, and explains to him, not so, father, for the other is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head. So maybe you see the influence of Pharaoh and Joseph growing up in the Egyptian world and the royalty where it was by order and not by merit. So, and Jacob objects, saying, I know, my son, I know. He too shall become a people, and he too shall be great. Yet his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall be plentiful enough for nations. Can you imagine that today? If that happened today? No. I mean, it's showing favoritism.
Yeah, but it's, there's a strong emphasis on merit.
Mm-hmm.
He is also a prophecy. In the last days, it is a prophecy. He is prophesying and he sees far in the future who is going to be the more meritorious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Ephraim, was a recent video that I saw on the tribe of Ephraim, and Jeroboam was, I believe, from the tribe of Ephraim.
Mm-hmm.
So when the kingdom split in two after the death of King Solomon, and you had, of course, Solomon's son Rehoboam, who kept Judah, and then the northern kingdom of Israel was transferred to Jeroboam,
Right.
who was from the tribe of Ephraim. So they ruled over the other 10 tribes. So
Right.
it became a, that was fulfilled. And but going back to the swearing under the thigh and all that, I had a comment. My father used to say that was because you were swearing by the covenant.
True.
And so I wanted to ask, this is the case?
That is true. This is how we still swore solemnly, or even, when with a grandmother, come here, put your hand under my thigh or put your hand over my thigh. And we knew it was a very solemn vow that we took.
Right. And since, of course, the covenant is the circumcision,
Right.
you're putting your hand close to there.
Right.
If anything, swear by that. And then
That's
it's
right.
like, okay, wow, this is something heavy.
Yep.
I was
James?
reminded of when Jacob was named Israel,
Mm-hmm.
and the angel touched his sciatic nerve.
Mm.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Very good observation. That is correct also. But we have the example of Abraham asking Eliezer, swear, and also this oath is taken place under the thigh. It is to use a euphemism.
That's correct. So
It was a way of taking an oath, I believe, because the circumcision was known in the Middle East, in the Near East, but it was practiced only among the nobility and the clergy. The Torah again is going to make an innovation by including for the first time children, by making it universal. So I believe that this oath was a very old oath to put the hand under the thigh.
okay,
Yeah.
and of course we see the importance of having a way to get people to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and we see that's one of the things we see today. Of course, that is a huge problem where, yeah, people do oaths here in court, but people routinely lie under oath. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, if you don't believe in a creator or in a greater power than you, then there's nothing to stop you from lying.
Or being stoned to death for lying or stealing. So
Right,
it's
or
the penalty doesn't match the
exactly,
crime anymore.
exactly. You can be a false witness and have somebody killed.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Then if you're discovered to be a false witness, what exactly is the punishment?
Right.
And according to the Torah, it should be whatever you were trying to give that other person. So if you were going to get them killed, then you get the death penalty. So it's a very severe. Yeah, and I've always been a proponent of this, and have been, kind of watching what goes on in this period of time with frustration, because crime just multiplies, and then of course nothing is done to control it. So.
Well, these are Jacob's blessings. Let's move now to the death of Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
Because after the blessings, Jacob passes away at 147 years old, right?
Right.
And his death, this is such a cool part. I love this part too. His death is marked by a great mourning, and Joseph, who had become a high-ranking official, the viceroy, the second in charge, orchestrates a grand funeral procession to bury his father in the land of Canaan.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that. That's because to me it's fascinating, because this is before we go into slavery in this land as well. And we have Joseph, who's number 2 in charge, how things change. And here we are with the most esteemed in the most powerful land of the world at that time all coming to this as viceroy, this Jewish guy who's been running everything and avoided famine. And now it's his father's funeral and everybody's coming.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on that? And anybody else who's got thoughts or questions or ideas, please feel free to chime in here.
Yeah, the first thing I think of is, first of all, the age, 147 years. It shows you a pretty marked decline in the lifespan from his father. His father, Isaac, died at 180. He actually lived longer than his father, Abraham, who died at 175. Now, God had said in an earlier parasha that man's years would be limited to 120, and we start to see this slide now. We see Jacob, and then later on we see Joseph died at 110. So there was a very rapid decline in the lifespan here. Pretty significant.
Great observation.
That's the first thing.
110 was the magic number for the Egyptian. He had reached the ideal age. Is it true? Is it not true? We do not know. Like us, it is to live 120. In Egypt, it was to live 110, because always of the digit, the 10 digit was something magical. So for Egyptians, it was the ideal age. He was an ideal ruler, and therefore he was bestowed the final honor of dying at the age of 110, the ideal age. Because Moshe Rabbeinu is going to die at the age of 120, and Aharon 123.
Right.
You know which character I like in this is Pharaoh.
True.
It's like the best Pharaoh of all of them that we've had and
That is
encountered.
true.
Yeah, I mean, he had a lot to be thankful for, right? Because Joseph not only
True.
avoided the famine, but he made Pharaoh insanely rich.
True.
He by the end of the famine, he had all the money in Egypt and all the land in Egypt.
That is true.
I mean, he had everything. He owned the
But
entire
look at
country.
his open-mindedness. Joseph is in jail, right? He's in
True.
what I picture a dungeon. He's in jail and is let out to interpret his dreams. Who is this guy in jail? And all of a sudden, he's put in this position.
That's a really good point. Actually, that's a much better.
It's the open-mindedness of Pharaoh.
Yeah, that's a much better indicator, because at that point nothing had happened, right? There'd been no famine or anything, and Pharaoh is just living kind of a normal, stable situation, and yet he has the open-mindedness to say, you know what, I'm really bothered by this dream I just had.
And
right?
look, this is the second or third time now, I think, in interaction with Joseph that he said, you made a promise, you need to keep it, so go. It was to give them land. When his family came, he pushed that. He said, get the choicest piece of land and settle them there. And now Pharaoh says, go and bury your father as you promised.
I believe that above this literal translation, there is the hidden hand of God to show that he can elevate anyone from the lowest position to the highest position if that person walks with God, if he lives according to the will of God. I believe that is the lesson above the wonderful story, is to see that God says wherever Joseph was, he was successful.
Yeah, and also the reverse, that after, like you mentioned, Nathaniel, a few minutes ago, after having an Israelite be the viceroy of Egypt, right after that, what happens? The Jews become enslaved.
True.
Right? So we can go right back down, and so we see that, and that's an amazing lesson now, isn't it? That we hadn't learned even in the time of World War II. So many people in Germany were saying, "Oh, it's never going to happen here. Come on, whatever," and they forgot this lesson. And
True.
it's like this can happen anytime, anywhere.
True.
Rulers are quick to change, and power of an advisor is ultimately ephemeral.
True.
Yeah,
True.
Which is why being independent is so important.
Yeah,
True.
it's always amazed me how volatile power is. how many people who rise up to power are soon killed afterwards, and yet everyone dreams of power. It's a nonsensical thing that it's like the flies that go to the light that's going to kill them. This is what humans do to power, and it's so so volatile, and people chase after it, and after they get it, it's the worst life imaginable until you're eventually killed. So,
well, what happens after Jacob's death? What's the next highlight point in this?
The brothers are worried.
They are. They're all worried, and Joseph gives them a reassurance, which is, he cries a lot on the shoulders with the reconciliation. He's kind of a soft guy.
He is. And the question the rabbis have asked, did Jacob find out what happened? He has lived 17 years in Egypt. Was a secret revealed to him at one moment or another? Why Joseph is at this position? Who brought him there? Why?
Yeah.
Well, you see it right before Aliyah, the seventh Aliyah, at the end of the sixth Aliyah, where this sentiment is captured in his famous words. Even though you intended to do me harm, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people as he is doing today. So beautiful faith that he has.
Right.
Go on,
Yes.
James.
And the immense amount of trust in God too, because God never talks to
Absolutely.
Joseph.
That
Unlike
is good.
Right.
unlike Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God talks to them all the time. God never talks to Joseph. Joseph just has instinctual trust in God.
And look how he's rewarded, James.
Yeah, that's
Very good.
That's a really interesting point, because I think God doesn't speak to any of Jacob's sons. And so, which is kind of the difference you see between the patriarchs and now the generation after the patriarchs. If you notice, once Jacob dies, there's like a couple of sentences about Joseph's life, and that's it. There's nothing else remarkable mentioned. Once Jacob is gone, once the patriarch is gone, it seems like there was a kind of a decrease or a step down in the connection between, or in the directness of the connection between God and man. And so that's an interesting point. And there was also something else, which is what Madame mentioned. It's a great question. Did Jacob actually know what the brothers did? And there's a substantial amount of doubt, because in the parashot before, we see that Jacob did not trust his sons with Benjamin. Even though he sent Joseph by himself on the fateful day, he sent Joseph by himself. His brothers were not with him. The brothers could have claimed, hey, look, we didn't even see him. He never got here. He was killed somewhere.
Yeah.
It wasn't our fault. Yet Jacob doesn't trust them. And he says it. He says it explicitly. He says, he alone is left of his mother. And if I send him with you and all of a sudden some kind of tragedy befalls him,
Oh, remember, a different mom too. It's the love of his life, Rachel. So this is all what's left.
Also,
so they're stepbrothers, right? They're not exactly
Right.
full brothers.
Half brothers.
Right,
Half brothers.
And then, so you've got that. And then the other thing is, when they tell him that Joseph is alive, it says that his heart kind of faltered because he didn't believe them. And so this is like a major lack of trust that he had with his children. And so you wonder, it doesn't explicitly say, but you wonder, it leaves you wondering, did he know, did he not know? And
I believe he knew, because in the blessing to Joseph, he talks about the archers, he talks about the hatred. He obviously must have finally understood what happened, or maybe it was revealed to him at the end of his life, because he mentions it in the blessing. That
really
Joseph, go back to the blessing.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
He acknowledges that Joseph had a hard life. He talks about archers. He talks about hatred.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's
Was there a last moment confession of the brothers to the father.
Who knows? But it's interesting that when the brothers say this to Joseph, that Joseph acknowledges that, yeah, I know, I know my father thought like this, but if the father didn't know, then this conversation would have never come up with Joseph.
That's what,
Imagine,
yes.
imagine
That is,
they must have sat down after they were reunited, and I would imagine Jacob would have asked him, "Hey, what happened?" And then the question becomes, here's an interesting question. Joseph used to tell on his brothers, right? He used to always bring evil reports. So did Joseph do that again? And did he
I
say,
don't,
"Hey, yeah, they sold me," or did he protect them?
I think he protected them for the sake of unity of the family.
I think that maybe when he saw that his brothers were protecting Benjamin, then
Right.
he may have said, "You know what? Okay, now we're all together. Now I'm going to protect them. Why cause this great anguish now?" I mean, if Jacob didn't know by this point, imagine the anguish you would cause to an old man to tell him
Yeah.
something like this. So it's
Well, we
likely,
have Jacob being buried, and now the parasha concludes with Joseph's death.
Mhm.
And here's the end of a great run. And I didn't realize until I think James was the last one to read through this, or the last Aliyah. And here it is. It's last paragraph. At length, Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm about to die." Well, Joseph's the second youngest of the 12.
Mhm.
yeah.
I wonder how many, do we know how many brothers were left? Because he says to them, "I'm about to die." So I'm assuming he's going to pass away before them.
Right.
I don't think we know the ages of the brothers, like when they died.
Yeah.
Well, they are all about born 7 years apart, 7 to 10 years apart.
Each?
Well, because the first 7 years of servitude of Jacob, nothing happens. So in the year 8, he gets married to Leah and to Rachel. And from the time 8, the age 8 to the age 20 when he leaves, finally all those children are born within 10 years, 7 to 10
so you're
years of
saying
each
they're
other.
all close. Yeah,
They
they're
are
all,
very close in age.
yeah.
That is
yeah.
why they are surprised when Joseph sits them in order. They are surprised, they are amazed, because they are maybe a year apart.
Well, I'm amazed how all these biblical figures know when they're going to die. And he says, "I'm about to die. God will surely take notice of you and bring you up from the land promised." So Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, the sons of Israel, so his brothers. So he makes his brothers swear, "When God has taken notice of you, you shall carry up my bones from here." And Joseph dies, like Sam had pointed out, at 110 years old. And as James noted, he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt.
Right, and not buried. Put in a coffin, but not buried.
Yeah. So this oath is fulfilled during Exodus as Moses carries Joseph's bones out of Egypt.
Right.
Correct.
And this parsha serves as a bridge between the book of Genesis and the subsequent books of the Torah, as it sets the stage for the descent of the Israelites into Egypt and their eventual enslavement leading to the Exodus. And this portion of Vayechi also emphasizes the theme of divine providence, illustrating how God's plan unfolds through the lives of the patriarchs and their descendants. And until next week, wish you Shavua Tov.
Thank
Thank you all for joining.
Tov.